This conference will now be recorded.
Okay.
Well, welcome again, everybody, to John Howard Society Week. We're very pleased to be focusing on the federal framework to reduce recidivism, which has 5 key pillars. And today we're going to be looking at the housing pillar, which is very important for John Howard societies across the country. I think we have a lot to share. I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other. And I'm very excited to be introducing Patricia Bacon from the John Howard Society of Okanogan, who are launching a tiny homes initiative that I think looks very interesting. So, Patricia, why don't I just turn it over to you? I'm sure they'll be able to see you, which will make it a more engaging presentation. And I will be here, but not visible. Thank you very much for joining us, Patricia.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Is my microphone okay and my volume all right?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
good.
good. Thank you so much. I do have a PowerPoint presentation to share. I think, Ria, I think you need to give me permission to share, and I can share my PowerPoint.
Should be good now.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, I'm new to this. Nope, that's not the one we want. Let me not share that one. I think, okay. Are people just looking at me right now? Okay.
Yes.
I gotta figure out what I'm sharing. Okay, here it is. Okay. Sorry, folks, it's a new interface for me. Zoom, Teams, now we got this one. Okay, are people looking at a screen that says Step Place, Kelowna, BC?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, thanks so much. I'm going to do a little presentation and then there'll be room. I'm going to make sure there's time for questions at the end. And but before we begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Silk people. And I've made a commitment to moving with respect, humility, and compassion on these lands, and will strive to make John Howard Society Okanagan and Kootenay's sites and its programs welcoming to all Indigenous people. Now, let's see. Step Place was just launched 2 weeks ago. It's in Kelowna, BC, and it's a partnership program between the John Howard Society of Okanagan and Kootenay, the City of Kelowna, and BC Housing. Now, I'm just going to make sure I can. Okay, great. So a little bit about the John Howard Society of Okanagan and Kootenay. We have several programs in justice, housing, shelter, community inclusion, and outreach. I may not be looking directly at you because I got to look at my screen. So we've been recognized for offering innovative programs that support housing, education, and independent living. We have services in Okanagan, in Vernon, Kelowna, and Penticton at this time. A little bit about our housing programs. We have quite a large housing portfolio. Currently, we have community housing program for people with disability and complex needs. So we have 5 group home type living programs from Vernon to Penticton, as well as we offer home share living. We have about 20 homes in home share living at this time. We also have housing for justice involved persons, including a transitional housing for persons exiting the correctional system. And we have 4 beds. And then we also have a community residential facility with 5 beds. We also have some larger housing programs, including a low barrier shelter called Cornerstone Shelter with 80 beds. And in our supportive housing portfolio, our first one was Cardington Apartments that was opened in 2008 with 30 units. We have Hearthstone that was opened in 2018 with 50 units. Newgate Apartments, 50 units. Samuel Place, 50 units. Stephen Village, 50 units. In Samuel Place, we also have a managed alcohol program in Samuel Place. In Stephen Village, we have a focus on working with people who are aging and people with complex health needs. and in Hearthstone is a center of excellence for harm reduction. As of last week, we now have a new step place, 60 short stay units or tiny homes, and that's transitional housing, and that's what I'm presenting on today. So a little bit about homelessness in Kelowna. Much like the rest of Canada, we're in a bit of a housing homelessness crisis. We have about 250 people who are unsheltered, living in encampments in various places around the city, as well as about another 250 people in shelter. So a number of years ago, the capacity of shelters was outstripped by the number of people who were needing shelter spaces. And so now we have as many people outside in encampments as we do in the shelter environment. So out of that need, the Kelowna City Council and Mayor acknowledged that they had a housing crisis that needed to be rapidly resolved. And the British Columbia government also recognizes that there's a housing crisis throughout BC. So the provincial government of BC introduced this concept called Heart and Hearth. Heart and Hearth are two new BC provincial initiatives designed to help people living outdoors and in encampments to better access support services, shelters, and housing. HEART is an acronym that stands for Homelessness Encampment Action Response Team. So this group is they're outreach workers, and they're meeting people in the encampment spaces, trying to help address some of their more immediate pressing needs and connecting them to services. Hearth is the housing part of the response, homelessness encampment action response, temporary housing. So HEART supports a coordinated multi-agency outreach to people living outdoors in encampments. It's not designed to become redundant to maybe some of the organizations that are already working in an outreach capacity, but to serve more as a coordinating arm. And then we have Step Place, which is the funded through BC Housing's Hearth program, and it's the first Hearth program for Kelowna that opened. The goal here is to make homelessness rare, brief, and one time. This is the pictures here. I tried to put in lots of pictures so you can get an idea of the site. So this is an idea here. If you're looking at the picture, there's 60 units here. So there's rows and rows of these little, what they're called pallet homes. So Step Place, this step refers to supported transitional housing with embedded programming. So we had our ribbon cutting on February the 16th with the BC Minister for Housing, the Mayor and Council for Kelowna, Interior Health British Columbia, and John Howard Society. So when we think about Step Place, it's important to understand that Step Place is designed to be transitional housing. So when we think about shelters, shelters are about an immediate and urgent overnight assistance to people whose survival needs are not being met. Somebody isn't on mute and we can hear you unwrapping your candy. So a shelter can help people become stable so that they can move out of the shelter and into accommodation that provides them with additional supports. And transitional housing is meant to be that in-between space between a shelter and permanent home. So here we are looking at a stable environment where participants are supported to prepare for and find a more permanent home, and participants can address the circumstances that may have led to or was caused by their experiences of homelessness, followed by permanent home. And so the idea of transitional housing, it's out of the shelter. It's a temporary space where you can maybe get a lot of programming and a lot of robust supports so that a permanent home and the appropriate permanent home follows after that. So a little bit about the site details of Step Place. So it's 60 detached, what we're calling short stay units. A lot of people are calling them tiny homes. You can call them tiny homes. They don't have a bathroom in them and they don't have a kitchen in them. And it's transitional housing. So for us, we feel a more appropriate way to sort of call them is a short stay unit. The site itself, though, has a large community program and kitchen space for gathering and for group and life skills classes. There's a total of 14 shared washrooms and showers and sinks. It's a French fenced property with controlled access for the security of the participants. There's 24-hour on-site staff. We provide a daily breakfast and a hot dinner. In regards to that daily breakfast and hot dinner, though, there is a community kitchen where we will do cooking classes as well as a kitchen space where if you wanted to make your own meal, your own lunch or something like that, you can go in and use that space. We provide on-site laundry, and there's a robust program of supports to help people prepare for permanent housing. We also offer an overdose prevention service at this site. We have a bike shed for people. A lot of our clients use bikes. There's a network of bike paths throughout Kelowna. And for many of our clients, being able to have a place to store their bike safely is important. And because the short stay units are so small, we want to discourage people from storing their bike in the little unit. People who are staying in the program pay $500 a month. The $500 is based on the social assistance shelter allowance rates for BC, which is very low. So here's a shot of the units being craned in. The units are technically designed to be built right on site. However, because it was January and it was quite cold, they were assembled in a warehouse and then they were brought in over to the site on the back of a truck and then craned into their position. Here's an aerial view of the site. It gives you a better idea of what your sort of this sense of things. First of all, how many there are. And if you look in the top right corner, there's some ATCO trailers in the very top right corner. Those are the ATCO trailers where the community programming space and offices are. I'm going to give you a little bit more detail of that a little bit later. If you look to the top of your left of your screen, you'll see what looks like an old red shed that's being converted into a smoking area. And most of the site will have some beautification and some paving brought in the spring. So right now, this is what it looked like last week. There'll be some paving. We'll be bringing in some planter boxes and doing some beautification as well. We're also going to be we'll also be doing some vinyl wrap on the units. So each short stay unit will be transformed into these little cuties with some vinyl wrap so that it won't be a sea of white. They'll have a different design concept around them. So it'll be a little bit more colorful and a little bit more pleasing to the eye. So inside the units, this gives you an idea of what it looks like on the inside. Units are outfitted with a mini fridge that we put in for everybody so that they can store some of their own food. A set of dresser drawers. There's some built-in shelving as well. Under the bed bins, there's room under the bed for 2 tote bins, which is nice for some additional storage. We provide everybody with some basic hygiene and kitchenware so that they can do their own cooking and take some hygiene stuff to the showers. The site is very big and there's electrical power limitations. And because of that, we weren't able to include a small microwave in the units, which we would have liked to have done, or little coffee makers or blow dryers. So the whole site is a little fragile on the electrical draw. So we're happy that we got fridges in there. Every unit also has air conditioning in it and a heater in it as well. So this is a design idea view of the ATCO trailers in the common spaces that we developed for programming, because we didn't want people to just have a short stay unit and not have access to robust programming. So if you look at the top of your screen, this is where it says community dining and programming. This is where we created what we call our community kitchen, but it's also going to be a large group programming space. So up to about 20 to 25 people can be in there at any time. This is where we'll serve the hot supper from every night, and cold breakfast. Coffee maker in there. There'll be a TV in there, as well as a lot of opportunity for us to do large group programming. In the middle of your screen, that long section there in the middle of the screen is where the washrooms are. There's 8 washrooms here, but there's on the property, at the back end of the property, there's another bank of 6 more bathrooms with showers. Then here's the laundry area. And then at the bottom of your screen, that long, what looks like a pretty long hallway, it was a long ATCO trailer that we've converted into a section where there's office area for the staff to work, a smaller group programming space, a one-to-one support space to work with clients one-on-one, as well as a mental health and substance use coordinator and healthcare worker space that has a sink in it as well. And occasionally there'll be outreach nursing coming to the site as well. In the back area where it says utility room, we've converted that into a staff room and provided a staff bathrooms as well. So it's all with ATCO trailers. In the entire site, including the short stay units, is meant to be temporary. And at this point in time, the whole program is only set up for 3 years. However, the city of Kelowna has given the site for 10 years to BC Housing. And I anticipate that in 10 years from now, the site is still likely to be there, because the housing crisis rages on. So here we were on ribbon cutting day, doing a little bit of a tour to the officials around the site. Gives you a bit of an idea that we were still working on. This is the large community kitchen area, still in development. And here's a bit of a picture of it, a little bit more finished. So you can see we put in stoves and microwaves, and that area is for clients to be able to use, prep tables, etc. And then what you can't see to the right of your screen is where the servery is, where we would serve out the hot dinners. So participants here can cook for themselves, access a hot dinner nightly, have coffee and breakfast in the morning, and about 20 people at a time for programs as well. So when we think about Step Place, where it fits on the housing continuum in Kelowna, this gives you an idea of what we're dealing with. So there's the homeless encampments in the red stop sign here. And so the Heart outreach team, which is not John Howard, they're working and coordinating with other outreach organizations to help connect the folks that are in the homeless encampments and sort of address some of their immediate needs and barriers. And the idea is that to move them into shelters. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about the shelters are full. So the idea was with Step Place, because it's 60 units, is that we would be taking people from shelter and moving them into the transitional housing after they've been stabilized in shelter. So the whole idea here is to create a bit of a flow through that has been lacking in Kelowna previously. So for example, at John Howard, we have a shelter in Kelowna with 80 people in it. And we've had people in that shelter who have been there for a very, very long time because they haven't been able to access any other housing, transitional or permanent. And so they're languishing in shelters. And we have 5 shelters in Kelowna where a lot of that is happening. So the idea was to have Step Place be transitional, so a lot of the folks that are in shelters can move into transitional housing, and therefore people in the homeless encampments can then get into the shelter, stabilize, and then continue on their housing journey. So it's really about creating a continuum, and it's only going to be as successful as the continuum is successful. The dark arrow here is the idea that many of the people moving into Step Place we anticipate could move into independent market housing if it's affordable, if we're able to provide rent subs and outreach supports. Some people may be identified as being more suitable to some of John Howard's own supportive housing programs. Or a third option is identifying other housing, might be other supportive housing providers, treatment housing, group housing, etc. So it's really all about having that housing continuum and that flow. So first and foremost, Step Place is a housing-focused program with key goals around identifying and moving people into appropriate housing as quickly as possible, improving access to housing, education, employment, and life skills, reducing marginalization and increasing opportunity for full participation in community. The key concepts with the program are that stays are brief, the program is individualized and outcome focused, it is meant to be a pathway to the right housing and not meant to be the right housing, and it's focused around an empowerment model of empowering people to take ownership of their housing. The program objectives are to provide skills and supports to prevent chronic or episodic homelessness, help build capacity for independent living, increase participants' ability to meet their permanent housing needs, coordinate with the HEART teams so that we're ensuring that we get the right program fit, eligibility, and success, and build a sense of community among the people who are often marginalized and excluded from meaningful participation. In order to achieve these objectives, we have a very robust staffing model that includes life skills workers, tenant support workers, a housing navigator who supports people in articulating and developing their own housing action plan, as well as a mental health and substance use coordinator and a healthcare worker. And a site manager to oversee the whole program. So when we look at the key activities that we're going to be engaging with, the first thing is that every person who comes to live at Step Place will complete a housing plan that identifies their needs and sets housing focused goals. We're going to teach some skills and develop competencies in many areas, including things like cooking and meal planning, laundry, shopping, budgeting, banking, rights and responsibilities of living in rental housing, and guest management, to name a few. We're also going to connect people living at Step Place to important community programs such as health and mental wellness services, literacy programs, social assistance. We're going to provide navigation and direct services to assist folks with full participation, including things like obtaining ID, completing housing applications, accompaniments, navigations, accompaniments, and computer access to do job and housing searches. We're also going to provide liaising and specialized services to diagnosis and assessments, to specialized programs, to specialty services, such as reconnecting people to their First Nation community, veteran affairs, etc., and to John Howard's own employment program and other community employment education programs that we have. And finally, we're going to assist folks that need it with health and mental health and substance use planning. So the key program outcomes are we're hoping to see that time spent in homelessness or shelter is decreased overall for people in Kelowna. The number of people finding permanent housing is increased. The number of people returning to shelter or outdoor encampments is decreased. And that overall, a program like this, because it is new and it's innovative, first of its kind for Kelowna, that overall the whole community that we're going to raise our knowledge around what are the best practice interventions for rapid rehousing. So that's the end of my formal presentation, and I thought I would make sure that we had time for any questions, if people have any questions, and yeah. So thank you.
Hi, Patricia. It's Catherine again. I think that's terrific. I mean, one of the things that I think is really important is that housing alone is not enough. People need those support services, and it looks like you've got them really well embedded there and quite well connected with your community. I just have one question about, I mean, a growing concern is that a lot of people, about, estimates anywhere from 20 to 30% of people leaving prisons are being released into homelessness and heading for the shelters.
Yeah.
Would they be welcome in your housing unit as well?
Yes, that's a great question. And the important part though is around the flow.
Yeah.
So the real goal that we wanted to do here was that people needed to go to shelter and then come into step place. And so it's not necessarily going to be that for people coming out of corrections that they would be able to go straight into step place, and that they would maybe need to go into shelter and then come into step place.
Yeah.
We are hoping that we might have a little bit more say in that. Um, to maybe take some people directly from corrections. However, the whole purpose of the program from a BC province lens is
Hmm.
that heart and hearth model, which is really about reducing encampment numbers.
Right.
So if we had a person who's in a correctional center and they come straight into step place, they're going to not see that negative decline in encampment, right? So for them, they're looking to see we open 60 units of short stay housing. They want to see that 60 fewer people are in an encampment and that they went to shelter and filled shelter beds kind of thing, and that there's that flow. So it's not a no, but it's not a big yes. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Yeah,
but we would,
it is for people who have defaulted into the shelters after
yeah,
custody and are looking for a way out. Yeah, okay,
exactly.
that's good.
And we do recognize though that that is a vulnerable time for people coming out of corrections, going into shelter.
Yeah.
And the low barrier shelter environment can sometimes be too low variable and it's pretty vulnerable. So it's a bit of a dance, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Hmm.
Are there any other questions?
We do have a question from Melissa.
Great.
She would like to know what the biggest challenges to implement this program have been.
Well, that Melissa, great question. So there's been a couple of challenges. Uh, Very high level, the challenges has been getting an alignment between what the province wants from their Hearth and Heart initiative, what the city of Kelowna really wanted with getting people off the out of the encampment. That's very, very, very a visible homelessness problem. That's sort of a bit of a stigma for this mayor and council, and what John Howard, what we're trying to do in community around working with people in homelessness. So those three things aren't perfectly aligned. And so you're trying to develop a program and a project, and everybody wants what they want, and you're trying to get it all aligned. So I think keeping that in mind, and that's the reality of our work, is that you're managing people's expectations, what they want, what you know is right, those kinds of things. So I would say very high level, that was one of the biggest challenges, was really trying to stay true to our vision, but while also acknowledging and recognizing that political parties had their vision too. And so, and because it's innovative for Kelowna, everybody's eyes are on this project, and it had a high visibility from the moment of of it being announced that this was a thing that was going to come for Kelowna. On a more sort of practical level, in terms of challenges, some of the pieces of the program, John Howard, we had to really fight for. So, for example, the shared community spaces where the programming is taking place, we had to kind of fight for that. And I think what they really wanted to do was they wanted to just put 60 houses and some bathrooms and call it a day. And we were like, no, no, no. We really need program space. We need space for our staff to work. And we need to be able to do this really well if we're going to have an impact. So for us, that was another piece. And being able to stand true to our vision and saying, we know what we want to do and we know what kind of space we need to in order to do it. And then finally, the third challenge was there was a bit of a hurry up and get it done kind of thing. So the month of January for me and my team, I swear to God, it was the longest January of my life. And so I feel like I think my team probably feels the same way. So it was a very planning meetings every single day, a lot of meetings and stuff like that. So that was challenging because it was a lot of pressure to get it open very, very quickly.
We have another question from Anita.
Okay.
What advice would you give to organizations who've been granted funding to create infrastructure in their communities for transitional housing? For example, municipal housing or municipal funding, but who don't have a lot of options for longer term operational funding, for example, to continue to staff those programs?
Yeah. So the question is, what advice around that?
Correct.
Yeah. So there's money to build something, but there's not money to keep something going. Is that right? Like the operational piece isn't there, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that, I feel for that problem because that's our reality, right? It's like it's one thing to get the housing, it's one thing to get infrastructure up, it's one thing to get the walls, and then it's another thing to figure out, well, what do people need besides the four walls? And for us with Step Place, we have a very robust operating budget. And we asked for that. And for John Howard, when we came to the table with our RFP, we put in, like, it was more like we said, this is what it's going to take, this is what we asked for, and we were going to not necessarily do it if they were going to come back with a really skinny budget, and it was like, no, we know it takes, you need to have that operational capacity baked in. The other thing too with these tiny houses, me personally, I did another tiny house project when in another job I had up north, and the thing that I've learned is that these kinds of small units, clients can be very hard on them. And so you need a really good repair and maintenance budget. You need to have a pretty robust person on site who can fix things. So you need that stuff too. So when we have, I wouldn't do a tiny house project unless you got the operational dollars backing you for the year over year maintenance and site supervision, etc. The other thing with small houses, if you have clients who struggle with maybe hoarding or excessive belongings and stuff like that, that behavior doesn't necessarily change because they're in a very small space. So you need an outreach worker or a support worker who's supporting your clients around that excessive belongings behaviors and helping to keep that reduced, because that's a problem as well. And when smaller spaces, they have to be even better at managing their stuff. So you need all those pieces. So if you've got infrastructure money but you don't have operational money, you know in a way you're probably dealing with housing populations that are further downstream in terms of they've had the supports, or they've had the interventions, they've had those life skills programs, and they actually just need affordable housing. And so, and I probably everywhere in Canada, it's like Kelowna as well, you got that missing piece further as well. Like, we have an affordable housing problem. We have a lot of people, they don't need supports, they don't need anybody to teach them how to cook, they just need affordable housing. Um, so maybe that's what I would be recommending. And then it might create some spaces further downstream.
Catherine
Okay,
has her hand.
I had my hand up there, Ria. There's a lot of housing issues in the criminal justice system right now. Like, one of them that I'm trying to figure out whether this model might be adapted for other purposes besides
Mhm,
the very serious encampment issues that I think a lot of
mhm.
communities are struggling with. One of
Yeah.
the problems we find is way too many people are in pretrial detention.
Yeah.
And often it is because they don't have a fixed address or they don't have any place to go. I mean, do you think it would be possible to have such a model that would provide, an alternative to detention for people awaiting trial so that they don't have to be in prison? They could maintain their employment. They could, there would still be a site for them, but it wouldn't be as onerous or nearly as expensive as detaining them in a correctional facility.
Yeah, totally. I think this model, what you're getting at, Catherine, is that this model has real potential for a lot of different, to meet a lot of different needs. As I think, particularly when you move into a transitional thinking, not a permanent thinking. So,
Yeah,
and so when you're thinking about, we have times in people's lives where there's a need for short-term housing, a short-term solution. Um, this idea of a short stay unit or a small house can be particularly valuable, and I think it's a great way to think about utilizing small homes or short stay units, etc. And so I would totally agree. I think it would be quite valuable, and it could be far more than just a homelessness encampment response type of housing.
yeah. I think there's
I
some
think it's
real
all
real
about building,
potential.
yeah, and I think it's all about, what you're building in terms of programming into it,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you can be doing customizable programming. For us, we were building in programming that was around sort of addressing those pieces that gets folks into their permanent housing. But for other people, it might be more around supporting a person while they are waiting to deal with the criminal justice system in how it's impacting their lives at this moment in time, et cetera. Yep. I think if we're looking at small homes for permanency, I would not recommend this size. It's too small. There's no sink in there. You can't even wash your hands in your unit. There's no toilet, etc. And I would recommend a bigger tiny home. If we're
yeah.
looking at more permanent housing, and we've seen that some veteran housing, etc. in North America. I did a tiny home community up north, and those houses were 260 square feet, and they
Right. Yeah.
included your own toilet, your own shower, your own sink. So if you
This
if you
is
were looking at more long-term housing, I would suggest tiny houses can work. I think they just need to be a little bit bigger.
yeah. This is
Yeah.
more like a bedroom. You've got a
It's a
bedroom
bedroom.
and
Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
then you've got your community centers for everything that you need. Yeah, it's a lot like
Yeah.
camping. I like it. It's but you
Yeah.
can see, yeah, it's good.
I think one of the things that tiny houses do that in that is very interesting is you have that door that you can close,
Yeah,
and it's not connected to a shared hallway or a shared like apartment building. And there's something about that door that, as a person, it's my door. I can open it. I can let somebody in if I want or keep it closed. And I'm not in a shared hallway. I don't have somebody right next to me pulling the alarm, the fire alarm, or pounding on my door, those kinds of things. Um, it kind of shifts something, and it gives a person a better sense of autonomy and mastery
mm,
that sometimes when we're housing and working with people who are vulnerable, they lose all of that. And so I think it just restores this little bit of dignity and autonomy. And I do believe that small homes give that, and that's different than what you can give somebody when they're in a large apartment building.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
I think it's great. John Howard also provides um, alternatives to detention for immigration purposes, which again is very
Yeah,
short term, right? I mean, basically, it's stabilizing and keeping people in the community until a decision is made around deportation. So, but something like that might be quite useful, particularly when a lot of the provinces have severed their contracts for keeping people in the provincial jails awaiting
yeah,
these decisions. Yeah, I think there's a
yeah,
lot of scope for this model.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's great.
Mm-hmm. And the thing about this thing, because the pallet homes, they're easy to assemble and they can be assembled very quickly. And even if you have a temporary site, like for example, our program space is all ATCO trailers, so you can do something, you can scale something up relatively quickly if you've got
Mm-hmm.
if you got your right champions, if you got a progressive or an open-minded mayor and council, and you've got some money coming from your provincial ministry and stuff like that, you could scale stuff up relatively quickly, because it's all temporary kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, mhm,
That's good.
mhm.
Ria, did you have your hand up?
I do. I just wondered about, and maybe this is a strange question, but weather considerations.
Mhm.
British Columbia tends to be a warm, well, I don't know if all of it does,
No.
but certainly they don't have the winters maybe that, Ontario does, or some of the prairies. And so I'm just wondering, like, would those homes be suitable for all weather types?
According to Pallet, that's the company that makes them, the answer is yes. And the other thing is there is a pallet home community already somewhere, I think somewhere in Canada, and they just had a big snowstorm and the little houses all did okay. So that's the news. That's the news I got. Now, we just opened last week. And it's March now, and we're in Kelowna, so we do have a nice climate for sure. I think for us, what will be interesting to see is how well they do in the heat in terms of keeping the units cool, and how much of a draw on electrical power it's going to be. And so this is what we're interested in seeing, is how expensive the electrical is going to cost to keep them warm in the winter and keep them cool in the summer. And I can't well answer that. So next year, ask me next year.
Okay. Are there other questions for Patricia?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know it's a very kind of new model, so no.
Patricia, this is something I'm thinking as where you set them up now. I can't recall when you said you set them up or how long they've been set up. But as you get into, let's say, the spring and summer months, and people want to be outside more, or maybe doing things outside more, either collectively or individually,
Mhm.
are you going to be able to accommodate that on the site, or will they have to go to other public areas?
Yeah, so there is some room on this site for some outdoor amenities. Like we'll be able to bring in some picnic tables, etc. So there is a plan for some outdoor amenities. In April, they're going to come in and do paving. So the paving hasn't been done yet. So that needs to happen. And then we're going to start looking at where we can do some amenities on the site for outdoor as well, because yeah, people will want to be outdoors more. The little units themselves don't have a little porch or anything like that. So people, I don't know if it would be that easy for you to put a port like a chair, like a porch chair outside your unit. That's a really good question. They're pretty close together, so I'm just really not sure about that. But I do think it is in our intention to put some group outdoor amenity spaces together. Yeah.
I think it's really important. I think a lot of us are struggling. A lot of communities are struggling with what looks like an evident increase in
Hmm.
homelessness.
Hmm. Hmm.
And our research kind of shows that if you're homeless, you're more likely to have involvement with the criminal justice system than if you're housed.
Yeah.
And vice versa, if you're being released into homelessness, your chances of successful reintegration are considerably reduced. And for people who are coming out of prison finding a place to live is a real stressor. I mean, they're very
Mhm.
anxious. It's probably the
Mhm.
one thing that causes them more concern than anything else. So,
Yeah.
the more we can do on the housing side, and my hat's off to John Howard all across the country who see the concerns in their communities and move to respond. Quite a lot of interest in dealing with homelessness. My hat's off to all of the people who are participating in the coldest night of the year just recently and raising money for the homeless. It's all good. It's
Mhm.
so important, I think, for John Howard's generally. Sorry, mailman.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, we see this as an important initiative for Kelowna, and being able to see some flow through with Kelowna. That was one of the biggest problems that we saw was people would just get stuck at various places along the housing continuum, particularly in shelter. And yeah, and then with a lot of the clients that we serve who are criminal justice involved, there's really that level of stress and then feeling like there's no prospects. So we're really hoping that now when we're working with our folks who are criminal justice involved and coming out of corrections to really be able to encourage them to go to shelter, because we're able to say to them, you won't get stuck at shelter. Come to shelter, because very quickly then we can create that flow through into places like Step Place and onwards. So that's one of the things that we're hoping to be able
Yeah,
to
I
see.
mean,
So
some of them being released from correctional facilities that I have spoken to would rather be sleeping rough than being in the shelters, right? Which
yeah.
would take them probably a little bit more directly into your because if they're heading towards any kind of encampment or any kind of sleeping under bridges or whatever they do, that might contribute to the visible homelessness problem that this was
Mhm.
intended to address. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And this project is one of two. So next month there's a second one that's opening up, but it's not tiny homes. It's more work camp style housing, but it's also a second hearth response, and it's 60 units of work camp style ATCO trailer housing that's opening up in
Wow.
another part of Kelowna. Yeah, so that one will be interesting to see too how that helps. So the total response is 120 new transitional housing beds for Kelowna to help address the encampment related issue. And again, they will also be bringing people in from the shelter environment. So presumably, we're going to open up 120 shelter beds over the next few months and have that. So,
I think that's really good. We had a CMHC funded solution lab around housing for people coming uh, out of custody and heading towards homelessness, and I was really taken with those ATCO trailers, as Ria will tell you, in terms of adapting them for various purposes. I like the idea that what you've done in terms of it being the community space, those trailers, but they
mhm,
also
mhm.
make fine homes when they're
Yeah,
they can
yeah.
be outfitted to be, and I would imagine fairly quickly as well. So yeah, lots of options there. I
Mhm.
think, did I see Anita with another question? A data question, Anita?
Shocking, I know, Catherine, but yes, if there's time.
What's the
I was,
question?
yeah, I can read it out. I was just curious about, and I'm sorry if I missed this earlier, but how whether and how you're tracking data related to people who are coming through just the broader program for transitional housing, but in particular, whether you're able to capture information about people's justice involvement. So whether they're exiting or have been through federal custody, provincial custody, if they're intercepted at your location by police and sent somewhere else. So just kind of that, I love that you're talking about the flow through, but
Uh-huh.
how you're actually kind of able to measure where people are going and how they're coming to you.
So, great question. It's the data captures not as robust as maybe it needs to be, and it's still sort of we're still looking at what and how we're going to track outcomes. Because what we're really trying to do is demonstrate the program model has legs. So, however, when we do a housing interview with a person in here, part of that narrative about what's going on for them is where we would be capturing stuff like criminal injustice involvement, in terms of being able to help. Because one of the things that we're doing is setting the person up with a housing plan. So part of that housing plan is understanding the narrative of the here and now, and like, why are you here? Why are you homeless? Or, what's been happening for you? And so if it's a criminal justice involvement, it informs that narrative that it would be captured there. So, because one of the things that we're looking to see is, when as this model unfolds, we want to understand the unique circumstances that are related to a person likely to succeed with this model versus those who aren't succeeding, and why not. And so what's getting in the way versus what those circumstances are that are sort of those already built in and stuff. So we would be capturing that in the person's housing plan, and that is done within the first week of them moving in.
Thank you for that. I think it's such an important distinction, and especially as you think through whether people are maybe being excluded from the regular rental or housing market because of a criminal record, and then end up, right? Maybe they have the capacity to live somewhere else, but the record itself is the barrier. Then I think that's a really important distinction to make.
Yeah, exactly. So those kinds of things are really important in the housing plan, and understanding that. And so if maybe they were criminal justice involved, but it was a long time ago, but it's still getting in the way, it's like, well, okay, well, we're going to liaise you to the record suspension program, and looking at that and whether or not that makes sense for you right now, and whether that's something that we could be doing, or helping with accompaniments to landlords where that might not get in the way if they're showing up with a housing worker and an outreach worker, those kinds of things. So adjusting those pieces is going to be very important. And that's why everybody has a unique, an individualized housing plan and robust supports. So again, it's all about that robust programming supports, and not just here's the house and go live in it. And it's really like, we wanted a really robust staffing model. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, we're just about we're wrapping up here with only 2 minutes left. So Patricia, I just really wanted, I know how busy you must be getting this up and running, and I really want to thank you for taking the time to share what you're doing with the John Howards across the country, and some of our guests who have attended as well. I think it's got a lot of potential, and first of all, I would always like to thank your counselors and the people of Kelowna for giving you that land for 10 years. That's often a big hurdle in terms of addressing some of these issues. Yeah. And for BC Housing, who's so supportive. So, great on them for recognizing that this is really something that needs to be done. And hopefully we can find a lot more compassionate models than the bulldozing the homeless camps, which seems to be a strategy in some communities. I think there are better ways. Yeah, that's
for
great.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, well, it'll be one to watch.
It will be, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. We wish you all the best with it. It's gonna be great.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me present today. We're proud. We're excited. We're curious, and we'll see how it all goes. So thanks.
Terrific.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody else for joining us. And we will have sessions all week long at this time on the various other pillars of the strategy. So please come back, and hopefully I'll have worked out my logistical issues before then, my technical issues. Janice is laughing. Thanks, Janice. Okay, take care, everybody. Have a good day. Take care.
Thank you, Patricia.
Happy John